Landlords use screening tools such as background checks and credit reports to assist them in finding the right tenant for their property. So, why should an applicant also use tools to screen a potential landlord for credibility and reliability? In this webinar, participants will learn ways to vet a potential landlord. Hello, my name is Lynette Pearl, and I am the Senior Associate of Housing with Refugee Housing Solutions, a project of Church World Service under an agreement paid for by the U.S. Department of State. Church World Service is a faith-based organization working to help communities around the globe with sustainable responses to hunger, poverty, displacement, and disaster. The screening goal for a landlord is to identify which applicant in a pool of applications that will most likely fulfill the lease terms and take care of the rental property. Since landlords have a pre-screening process, a tenant should also have one as well. Now, even though the affordable housing market is tight and it's also competitive, this should not deter an applicant from having pre-screening standards. Having a process helps an applicant from entering into a possible disastrous rental experience with a questionable landlord. So in this webinar section, I am going to discuss some practical ways to pre-screen a prospective landlord. Now I'm going to go back to the days when I was a housing specialist. So the first thing I would do, I would check out online reviews. Now, online apartment reviews and ratings, they are a great way to get more information regarding the property and potential landlord beyond what's shared on a listing or website. Unfortunately, there are some false reviews out there that can be misleading. So how do you evaluate and utilize apartment reviews to determine if the information is credible? Well, the first thing you need to do, you got to determine if the reviewer is legitimate. A reviewer can have a negative, positive, or informative motive. So, for example, a tenant that has been evicted would possibly write a lethal review, or an employee that wants to improve the image of an apartment would post a glowing review. Now, the informative motive is the reason why reviews exist. So if a review is overly negative without specifics, this could possibly be a distraught tenant. Or a review that's positively exaggerated and appears to have like a brochure-like language, this could be an employee. So watch out for vague reviews. Vague reviews with little detail may be the work of a fake poster. Sometimes called a review troll. Now, this person never actually lived at the apartment community. They just simply enjoy posting fake or misleading complaints on review websites to see what just kind of response they can get. Now, when I used to look, I would look at reviews that discuss issues. For example, are they talking about maintenance? Are they talking about the manageable responsiveness to issues and problems? And also the neighborhood desirability in the apartment choice. Another thing I would look at to see if the reviews are similar in nature. If there's multiple reviews that are similar in nature and focus on the same issue or problem, that is something worth noting. Again, look at, does the landlord reply? If a review has a response from the landlord with an apology and a possible solution, that shows that the landlord at least is responsive and cares about what's going on in their community or on their property. Ratings. It is common to see reviews at the low or high end of the star rating system. While there are usually fewer scores in the middle, the 3- and 4-star reviews, this tend to be more detailed and objective. Now, one thing you have to make sure with reviews is check the dates. Now, an older review can still provide insight, but you don't know what has changed since then. For example, the property could be under new management, or they've had a lot of personnel changes. It could have undergone renovations. These changes likely won't be reflective in a review that's more than a year old. So keep that in mind when you're reading older reviews. One thing I would check is to make sure the listing or the ad has not been copied. That's a common practice of a scammer. They do copy legit listings word by word, and then they make the ad appealing. So just simply take the ad, copy and paste the text, and do a Google search. So if you see something duplicate, a duplicate ad, or it comes up with different company and contact information, that is possibly a scammer. So I'm an example type of person. So I have pulled up a review on one particular property, one dated in 2021, and it stated, I lived at Market Station for the past 2 years in 2 different apartments. Market Station has the best amenities, office staff, and maintenance staff of any of the previous apartments I lived in. So if you jump down, as you can see, the manager did respond in a timely manner. So that's good. And it says, hi, we're so glad we're able to go above and beyond. So let's jump ahead. Again, here is the same property, and this is 2023. And again, great community maintenance is very responsive. Office staff provide great customer service. And you can jump down, as you can see, that the actual manager has responded. And here is another review with the same property. Management team is amazing, friendly, responds to requests or emails promptly. So based on the information we just reviewed, this is possibly legitimate what's being said about this particular property. Everything is similar in nature. They comment on the responsiveness of management and also of maintenance. One thing you should do is an online public property search. Part of a landlord's application process is determining if an applicant is financially stable. So why should an applicant also check on a potential landlord's ownership status and financial stability? Renting an apartment most likely to be foreclosed upon during a tenancy may not be a good idea. Even if the new owner allows the tenant to stay, a tenant may risk getting a new owner who isn't conscientious as the original landlord. So by doing a simple online public property search, you can find out if they are in the process of being foreclosed on. Now, when an owner has failed to make a loan or mortgage payment, a notice of default can be filed in the county where the property is located. Because the information is public, you can search and check the notice status through the county records office called the Recorder of Deeds or Recorder's Office. Now, when I used to lease up clients with a private landlord before leasing them up, I would check their ownership status to prevent being scammed or to prevent rental fraud. And there are several resources available to help verify home ownership. You can check with a local assessor's office, the local tax assessor's official website. You can look up property tax records, and you can find out who the property owner is by their address. And you can also learn who owns the home and how much property tax they are paying. Now, with the county clerk's office, it does have public records of property, deeds, and other useful information. So when searching for the property owner, not only will this tell you the owner of a house, but your county recorder may give you insight into the history of the property. And some local libraries may have a database where you can conduct a property search. This can be available online, or you may be able to find public records in person. Now, you could use a title company because title companies do research of the deeds, and they do perform that. And not only will you be able to find out the owner of the property, but a title search will check for any issues with the property. But however, using a title company, it does come with the cost for them to actually run the search. And being a resettlement agency, you are a nonprofit, you are limited on your funds of what you can do. Simply find a legitimate title company, tell them what you're doing, and a lot of them will negotiate either at a lower fee or provide the services for free for you if they know their mission and what you're trying to do. Now, here is an example of an actual rental scam that has happened from Craigslist.
Dila and Gigi Nadai found the perfect rental home.
We even bought our new rug. We got our Wi-Fi turned on.
This cute little cottage.
We found this apartment on Craigslist, this house. We came and we called the landlord. They told us to meet him over here to look at it.
They met the landlord, signed this lease, and paid him a $500 money order deposit. But days after moving in, they got a visit from the real landlord.
They were coming here to lock us out. We didn't even know what was going on.
Turns out the lease and rental company were all fake. The real owner wanted them out and was turning off their water.
The water they turned the water off.
It's called the house rental scam, and I tell you, it's getting slicker and slicker. Scammers will find a legitimate house or apartment for rent. They'll repost the ad on Craigslist. Then they'll give victims a phony lease to sign and take their deposit money.
It just feels like we're just lost. There's nothing we can do.
Look like they can do nothing, so.
That's what it looks like.
Dila and Gigi went to the police, but learned they're probably out of luck.
It's a civil situation right now. I'm hoping that the landlord and the tenants that are currently living there will let them stay there.
We contacted the owners, where a man told us they will now let the couple stay 30 days to fill out an application and submit a new deposit. But Dila doesn't know if they can afford it now.
I don't know what we're going to do. You know, they got our money.
That's why it's so imperative when leasing up with a private landlord to check the ownership status of the property. You can Google a landlord and or property. Just like you saw the story, it may seem obvious, but it's a good idea to Google the owner and even the address. If the property has been in the news lately, you will read all about it. And chances are the story will not always be positive. Now, if a landlord is able to disqualify an applicant for their criminal history, why shouldn't the applicant? Because arrest incidents and conviction records are public. You can look up a private landlord's criminal history. I want to make this caveat. However, each state does determine which records can be easily available to the public. For example, some states may not make arrest records easily available due to it being damaging to their reputation. With private landlords, apartment complexes, and property management companies, you can check with the Better Business Bureau to see if there's any type of complaints. One thing I used to do, I used to look to see if they had some code violations. Even through a title search, it will allow you to locate the owner of the issues related to the property. It will not report of any past or current code violations on the property or the unit. You can simply check with the local county or city code enforcement department to see what type of code violations have happened, and depending on what the violations are. The most common nuisance, you will have nuisance violations, which may include litter, trash, and uncut grass, and then property maintenance. These are some common things would be red flags for me if I saw that there was a lot of code violations on a unit or property. Another thing you can do, you can see if the online ad is professionally written. If an ad with questionable grammar or spelling, that can be a red flag. So carefully review the rental listing and check for spelling mistakes, odd wording, and overuse of capital letters. Again, I want to use a disclaimer with this section. I have worked with a lot of private landlords that English was not their first language, so just take that in consideration. Again, this is just one tool out of many tools you can use to vet an actual landlord. Now, one of the things I used to use, again, is a tool to vet a particular landlord. I would check the property class rating. By knowing a property class rating, it would help me determine if the rent that they're requesting is considered reasonable. So you're probably asking, what is a property class rating? So property class ratings, they were created by investors, lenders, and brokers to establish property classifications to communicate easier the quality, the age, and attributes of the property and the neighborhood location. Properties are classified either A, B, C, or D. Now, this rating is used across all real estate assets classes, which also includes office buildings, realtor centers, industrial and apartment structures. Now, a property class, it is determined by several important physical and financial characteristics. And some of these attributes typically include, but are not limited to, again, the location of the property, the age of the property, the appreciation, conditions of the property. So let's jump in. Now with the Class A properties, they are newer and they're best maintained buildings at the most expensive end of the property spectrum within a local market. Class A properties, they do attract tenants and buyers who can afford to live in luxury. They do typically have a positive outlook for future appreciation because of their access to the market's best amenities and attraction. Now, generally, the guidelines description for Class A properties are these properties are typically built within the previous 10 years. The appreciation is positive and is a positive in the foreseeable future. Now with Class B properties, they're well built, well maintained. Typically Class B properties are more than 10 years old. They are often located in neighborhoods close to schools and shopping areas. While there's no official guidelines for what a Class B property is, but most real estate investors identify Class B properties by some of the following characteristics. Typically 10 to 30 years of age and their fair appreciation, but may not appreciate as well as Class A properties. And it may require a little bit of maintenance. Now, Class C properties, they are older. They are reasonably well kept, but will also require some repairs. While there's no official guidelines for what a Class B property is, most real estate investors, again, they identify Class C properties by some of the following characteristics. They're typically older, mature. Class C properties are usually more than 30 years old. Future value of the property may or may not increase with time, but I want to point something out. Class B properties are always in demand. It's not because of the luxury they provide or the amenities. It's because they're practical and they're affordable. And then you have your Class D properties with there's no official guidelines for what Class D property is, but most real estate investors identify Class D properties by some of the following characteristics. They're found in areas, older neighborhoods. And again, not much appreciation can be gained from these properties unless there's been a significant gentrification occurring in the surrounding neighborhood. I want to add a disclaimer. Again, I don't want people to think all Class C and Class D properties are bad properties. Again, it depends on the capital improvements that have been done over time. I have seen Class D properties. Yes, they're older properties, but I've seen some in better shape than Class B or A because that actual property management company invests in capital improvements. I just want to add that disclaimer. So one thing you can do, if you feel comfortable enough, you can approach a current tenant and find out what he or she thinks about the landlord. Speaking to current residents can give you insight into what type of landlord they are and what it could be like to be a tenant. Trust and believe, if the person is an unhappy resident, they're going to vocalize their displeasure and willing to answer questions. When I tried to figure out what was going on with a property and I talked to a current resident, the current questions I would ask is, does the landlord handle repairs promptly? Another thing, what are your thoughts about the community you live in? Would you recommend a family member leasing here? So these are just a few questions you can ask if you feel comfortable again asking a current resident. Another thing I would ask is, do you perceive the property manager to be professional? Again, this is if you feel comfortable. Speak with current neighbors in nearby buildings and businesses. Ask them what the reputation of the building, the landlord is, and how they feel about that apartment community. Now, one thing you can look is that the curbside appeal. You can tell a lot about a landlord from the condition of the property. Good landlords make sure their properties are safe and well cared for. So look for unkept lawns, gardens, if gardens are there, broken appliances in the yard. Look for visible trash around the property. And what does a unit look like when you do the inspection? So we're going to drill down on what to look for when doing an inspection when you're doing a walkthrough. The first thing to check for when I used to check was the safety features. Are they in working order? The safety features I would look for is like fire alarms, sprinklers, were there fire extinguishers in the hallway and common areas? Do they have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors? According to the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code, smoke detectors should be in every bedroom and or outside each separate sleeping area and on every level of the home, including the basement. I would look for these things. And so if I saw that a landlord complies with the smoke detector requirement, it showed that they took their tenant safety seriously. Check the thermostat, see if it's working in its working order. Is it malfunctioning? Does the AC come on when you turn the AC on? Does the heater come on when you turn it on? And when I also did an inspection, I checked to make sure there was adequate water pressure and temperature. So make sure there's hot and cold water. If the landlord is responsible for supplying appliances, test them out, make sure they're in working order. For example, test each burner on the stove, make sure that the oven is clean and it heats up. Check the refrigerator and freezer closely. Make sure that they get cold. Make sure that the drawers open and close, the doors open and close. And also make sure there's no lingering smells. Check the plumbing. When doing a tour, you can check the plumbing by looking underneath the sinks, around the toilets for dripping water or leaks when in usage. Also check to see if they shut off properly. Like for example, if the toilet's still running after an unreasonable amount of time after flushing it. Is the shower or tub or sink, does it drain slowly? What I used to do, my rule of thumb is when I used to flush the toilet, by the time I leave the unit, is it off or is it still running? Assess the windows and doors. Check the doorknobs. Test all the door locks to make sure that they work. Try all the windows and doors to make sure they open and close properly, and also make sure windows open fully without getting stuck. My biggest thing is tripping hazards. Is the carpet and or towel properly installed and not worn down? Is there adequate lighting in common areas, stairwells, and the parking lot to prevent slip and falls? Well-lit areas not only prevents tripping hazards, but also supports safety and security for a possible tenant. So I would look at those things. And another thing is mold and mildew. Mold is the most common source of air quality problems in living spaces, and it can be difficult to detect since it hides in hard to see areas such as walls, ventilation ducts, and crawl spaces. But there are some inspection tools you can use to determine if there's possible mold in a unit. The first thing is when I used to open the unit up, when they did the tour, does it smell musty? Now, mold does have an earthy smell and it can smell like rotting leaves or decaying wood. A lot of times mold and mildew, they are used interchangeably because mildew is a certain type of mold. Mold and mildew can have appeared similar, but they have some differences. So mold and mildew can have appeared, mildew is powdery and downy in texture and appear as white or gray. And sometimes the white color may turn to yellow, blue, or green. But regardless if it's mold or mildew, just inspect for black or dark and ground spots on walls and ceilings. And you should also check for mold around tubs and underneath sinks. So below is a list provided by the Green Orchard Group on how to check for signs of mold. Again, like I mentioned, look for discolored areas on wall ceilings and moldings. If you have access to the ventilation ducts, look that area behind moist appealing wallpaper. Look at the carpet and the fabrics to see if there's been some recent water exposure. Look around the window frames, wall boards, and then in bathrooms again, look at the sink, the shower, if they have the curtains, look at even the curtains, the bathroom towels and tubs. And with the kitchen, again, the sinks, the cabinetry, kitchen appliance, i.e. refrigerators and dishwashers. And if you have a house you're inspecting, you have access and it has a basement and an attic, look at the walls, the flooring, the ceilings. Again, look around the window sills and look in the closets of the bedroom. So this is an example of mold on a wall on around the tub. And then here you can see another picture of mold. And this is a comparison of mildew versus mold. Regardless if it's mildew and mold, this is not good at all. One thing you should do also is check for power. Even though a rental property also have power, even if it's unoccupied. Without power, you can't test fans or appliances or even properly inspect dark rooms. I recommend bringing a charger in order to test the electric outlets in the unit and also turn all the wall switches off and on to make sure that they work. A lack of power might suggest the landlord is trying to hide something. When walking through the apartment, observe if and carefully take pictures and notes if they allow you to. And one thing is just check the overall condition of the house or the apartment or the unit. Is the paint or is the wallpaper, is it peeling? Again, are there some cracks and stains on the walls or carpet? And then also, we're about to hit an unpleasant part of the webinar. Check for rodent drippings and chew marks. One thing people don't know, bed bugs can live in empty units for months. So it's important you check for their presence. Bring a flashlight in order to look for fecal stains on molding and outlet covers. Bed bug feces, they are reddish and brown in nature. And also look out for black spots on walls and bed bug casings. So this first picture is an example of mouse droppings. And here are roach droppings. These are just examples. And this is a picture of bed bug droppings. And this is bed bug droppings with shells. So another thing, when I used to do tours, does the landlord rush the tour? The tour should not be rushed, but have a natural flow. If possible, it should start with the front entry, the kitchen to the living room area, bedrooms and bathrooms, and to the outside. Now, a reputable landlord will have a smooth tour with ample time to showcase the property and answer questions. Again, I want to add a disclaimer to this section is the difference between when someone is rushing you out because you're doing a thorough inspection of the unit versus due to time constraints. So again, you know the difference. If you're doing a thorough inspection, you're asking questions, and you can tell that the landlord is trying to rush you out so you cannot inspect other parts of the unit, then that should be a red flag. Another thing I always would do, I would conduct an after-hour tour. That's if you feel safe doing it by yourself. An after-hour tour during the week and weekend, it can let you know what typically is going on that property. It can tell you about the noise, issues with parking, how people come and go. Okay, we're going to go ahead. The United States, we're facing a housing crisis. And according to the recent GAP report published by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the market is short 7.4 million in affordable housing units. And guess what? The most affected are vulnerable population. Because of the demand for affordable housing, applicants must be cautious of unethical landlords who want to prey on them because they're vulnerable. And also they're unaware of their rights. So before signing, it's imperative that applicants to know what practice and terms are considered predatory. So, like I stated, unscrupulous landlords, they do prey on people in desperate situations, are those who are those who are unaware of their rights. So before a person should sign a lease, they should be aware of what predatory terms and practices in order to prevent entering into a landlord favorable lease. So what is a predatory lease? So it is a lease that is either borderline illegal and takes advantage of the renter, or it is a legal lease with contractual terms that are unfair to the renter. I'm going to go over some practices and terms an applicant should be cautious about before signing a lease. One practice is there's no unit to inspect. Now, if a landlord won't allow you to view the rental before signing a lease, that is a major red flag. Now, there's a difference when you're doing an original tour, or you go into a property and you say, look, I want to see one of your units. And they say, well, I have nothing available at this time. However, if you're going back to sign a lease, that unit should be inspected before signing that lease. The landlord offers no written lease. Now, even though a verbal lease, depending on each state, is not indicative of predatory practice, it can cause problems when there is a landlord-tenant dispute. And if by chance the landlord is unethical, the lack of a written lease can be a strategy they use to have it in their favor, or also stay under the radar from the IRS. Another practice, a predatory practice, is the landlord is pressuring the applicant to sign a lease without reading it. A landlord that pressures an applicant to sign a lease without reading it, that is a major red flag. Another red flag is if they are hesitant to answer questions regarding the lease or state that the unit will rent quickly. Now, again, a lease is a legally binding contract. So a reputable landlord would give a potential applicant ample time to review the lease and address any questions during the application process. Now, if you're working with a client and there's a language barrier, again, a reputable landlord will allow them to have a trusted case manager, a trusted family member or friend or sponsor or volunteer to help interpret the actual lease. I want to add this disclaimer. I do not recommend anybody under the age of 18 be an interpreter when we're talking about a lease, because again, a lease is a legal binding contract and anybody under the age of 18 cannot enter into a contract. So why would you have them interpret terms of an actual contract? That's just me personally. Personally and professionally, I don't think it's a good idea to have anybody under the age of 18 to do the interpretation of a lease. If the landlord requests post-dated checks, now checks can ensure that a tenant pays rent. However, if a landlord requires multiple post-dated checks before moving in, it can be a questionable practice that allows a landlord to withdraw money from their account at any time. Another thing that is a major red flag is if the landlord requests, they don't check income or references or do a background check. I understand there's barriers newcomers have with the alternative documentation and also not having a U.S. rental history and a limited income. It may be tempting to try to lease a client with a landlord that does not require income, a reference, or a background check. A legitimate housing provider will want a background or some type of documentation information on a potential tenant. A housing provider who does not have any legitimate information on their tenant is either leasing illegally or harboring undesirable elements of people. So Just FYI. If the rental price is too good to be true, like the saying goes, does it sound good to be true? It most likely is. So if the rental price is below market rate, it's possibly a scam, and that is totally a red flag. And there's a thing we call bait and switch. A big red flag is when a landlord do post a picture of a unit to pique your interest, but then when you go look at that specific unit, it's not available. And then they try to lease you something totally different, and they try to upgrade you with an actual apartment that is at a higher rate. That is something as a red flag as well. When a landlord requests an unusual large deposit. Now, security deposits, they do have a legal limitations on the amount a landlord can collect, and limitations they do. They vary from state to state, but the common practice is 1 month's rent, with some landlords charging additional amount due to the applicant's credit and or lack of rental history. Now, a predatory deposit will require a tenant to pay an unreasonable amount of money that puts them in a financial burden on the applicant. Another red flag is when the lease mentions mold. While it sounds gross, mold can be more than just a nuisance. Certain strands can cause major health problems, and for those who live in warm climate locales, the heat and moisture can make even harmless strands of mold grow into an unsightly problem. If the landlord asks an applicant to wire money or pay cash. Now, if a landlord requests wiring of money or cash for the security deposit or anything else, that is a red flag. Another thing is when a lease states that the tenant is responsible for all damages and repairs. Now, a tenant must by law leave the property in the same state he or she finds it in before moving in. Now, a lease that states that the tenant is responsible for all damages, that is a predatory practice. Because even that it varies state by state, you have called basic wear and tear. So a landlord can't even charge a tenant if it's considered basic wear and tear. And again, basic wear and tear is based on, is specific by each state. But if you see a lease that states that the tenant is responsible for all damages and repairs, that is a predatory practice. If the late fee is unreasonable. Now, even though a client plans on being a good tenant, we already know things happen, and sometimes they are required to pay they don't pay their rent on time. Now, if a reasonable late fee is under 5% of the rent. Now, if a landlord is charging more than 10% late fees and has other additional consequences, this can be a red flag. So again, check the lease to see what the late fee is. Now, this concludes this webinar. I know I've given you a lot of information, but the good thing is you can contact me by email. So after reviewing this webinar, you have some questions, feel free to email me at lpearl@cwsglobal.org, or you can book an actual TA session with me. I do hold TA sessions every Mondays and Wednesdays. I do hold 30-minute sessions. However, if you need additional time, feel free to reach out to me by email. So hopefully this webinar is helpful for you and your clients on how to vet a potential landlord. Have a blessed day.